The river didn't give up its secrets easily, and on that day it offered up a man more dead than alive. For Maeve Riley, a woman living on the frayed edge of the world, pulling him from the current, was an act of instinct, a flicker of a long dormant part of her soul. She thought she was saving a life. She had no way of knowing she was actually summoning a storm, because this was no ordinary drifter. He was a Colton. And the Coltons don't just thank you for a debt. They pay it in blood, in loyalty, and in binding vows that can never be broken. The sun beat down on the unforgiving expanse of the territory, bleaching the very color from the sky. For Maeve Riley, the heat was just another silent companion in a life defined by solitude. Her small, sturdy cabin, built with her own 2 hands, and the ghost of her husband's guidance, stood as a lonely sentinel overlooking the rushing waters of the Serpentine River. It was a place of deliberate isolation, a fortress against a world that had already taken everything from her. She had come here to forget the sound of gunfire and the sight of a good man falling. She had come for the quiet hum of the wilderness, for the honest ache in her muscles after a day of chopping wood or tending her meager garden. That afternoon, she was scrubbing laundry against a washboard by the riverbank, the harsh lye soap biting at the calluses on her hands. It was a rhythm she knew, a task that required no thought. Her mind was blessedly peacefully blank until a flash of wrongness caught her eye. It wasn't driftwood, nor was it a deer venturing for a drink. It was a patch of dark fabric, snagged on a tangle of roots near the opposite bank, bobbing with a sickening, lifeless weight. Curiosity warred with a primal instinct for self-preservation. This river was a wild thing, and anything it coughed up was likely to be trouble. But the shape was undeniably human. Cursing under her breath, Maeve wiped her hands on her apron, her heart starting a low, heavy drum against her ribs. She waded into the cool water, the current pulling insistently at her skirts. The journey across was treacherous, the riverbed a minefield of slick, unseen stones. As she drew closer, the scene resolved into a nightmare. A man face down in the shallows, his body held in place by the snagged leather of his gun belt. One arm was flung out, fingers brushing the water, as if in a final failed grasp for purchase. Blood diluted to a pale pink swirled around him, a grim halo against the brown water. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Every instinct screamed at her to leave him to let the river finish what it had started. He was likely an outlaw, a gunslinger, the kind of man whose life was measured in bullets and bad decisions. The very kind of man she had fled to this wilderness to escape. But then she saw the slight, almost imperceptible rise and fall of his back. He was alive. With a groan that was part effort, part despair, Maeve began the grueling task of freeing him. The gun belt was wedged tight. She had to submerge her arms to her shoulders, fumbling with the heavy brass buckle, until it finally gave way. The man's body sagged, and the current immediately tried to reclaim him. Maeve dug her heels into the muddy bank and fought back. Dragging him from the water was a monumental effort. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, and soaked through, he felt as heavy as a felled oak. She pulled, slipped, and pulled again, her breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. By the time she had him on the sandy bank, her entire body screamed in protest. She rolled him onto his back, and her breath hitched. His face, though pale and etched with pain, was surprisingly young. Dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and a scruff of a beard couldn't hide a strong jawline. But it was the wound that seized her attention. A dark, ugly hole high on his side, sluggishly weeping blood onto his torn shirt. A gunshot wound. Clean through from the look of it, but the bleeding was bad. "Damn you," she whispered to the unconscious man to the sky, to her own foolish heart. Damn you for not having the decency to just die. Getting him to the cabin was a fresh hell. She couldn't lift him, so she dragged him. She hooked her arms under his walking backward, her boots sinking into the soft earth, carving a desperate trail from the river's edge to her doorstep. Every few feet she had to stop her lungs on fire, her vision swimming. The sun beat down indifferent. Inside the cool dimness of the cabin offered little comfort. She maneuvered him onto the cot that served as her own bed, the ropes groaning under his weight. His head lolled to the side, and a low moan escaped his lips, the first sound he'd made. For the next several hours, Maeve worked with a grim, focused efficiency. She tore strips from her cleanest spare sheet for bandages. She boiled water, her hand steady, as she cleaned the wound as best she could. The bullet had passed through, leaving a ragged exit wound in his back that was even worse than the entry. She packed the wounds with a poultice of yarrow to staunch the bleeding and crushed willow bark for the fever she knew was coming. She worked without sentiment. This wasn't about compassion. It was about defiance. She had watched a man die once before, helpless to stop it. She would not be helpless again. She stripped off his soaked clothes, her movements brisk and impersonal, and covered him with a heavy quilt. His skin was already hot to the touch. As twilight began to bleed across the sky, painting the landscape in shades of bruised purple and orange, Maeve collapsed into her rocking chair by the cold hearth. She was exhausted, bone deep and soul weary. The man on her cot breathed in shallow, ragged pants. The only sounds were his labored breathing and the chirping of crickets outside. She had saved him for now. She had pulled a dangerous man from the river and brought him into her home, her sanctuary. Looking at his still form, a knot of pure dread tightened in her stomach. Trouble didn't just knock on your door out here. It washed up on your shore, bleeding and unconscious, and waited for the real storm to follow. She had a terrible sinking feeling that the river was the least of the dangers she had just invited into her life. The darkness that fell over the plains was absolute, a thick, starless blanket that swallowed the horizon. Inside the cabin, the single oil lamp cast long dancing shadows, turning the familiar space into a cavern of shifting anxieties. Maeve sat by the cot, periodically dabbing the stranger's fevered brow with a cool, damp cloth. His fever had spiked, and he'd begun to mutter disjointed words and names that meant nothing to her, but spoke of a life lived at the sharp end of violence. Silas. A trap. Find Wyatt. Each name was a splinter of dread under her skin. These were not the ramblings of a simple farmer. She had just managed to get him to swallow a little water when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the night's natural symphony. It wasn't the rustle of a coyote or the hoot of an owl. It was the rhythmic, percussive beat of shod hooves on hard-packed earth. Not one horse, several, and they were coming fast. Maeve's blood ran cold. She moved silently to the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains. 3 riders' stark silhouettes against the faint glow of the rising moon were cresting the ridge that overlooked her property. They moved with a purpose that was terrifying their path, unerringly direct toward her cabin. Panic seized her. She looked from the riders to the man on her cot. They were looking for him. Either they were the ones who shot him coming to finish the job, or they were his friends, which could be just as dangerous. Out here, a lone woman was a target, a complication, a thing to be used or discarded. Her hand went to the old shotgun her husband Thomas had left her. It rested on its pegs above the fireplace, loaded and ready. It was a comfort, but she was no fool. One woman with a shotgun against 3 armed men on horseback was no contest. It was a last resort, a final bloody statement. The hoofbeats stopped just outside. The sudden silence was more menacing than the approach. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a voice cut through the night, low and resonant, carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Hello, the cabin. We know our brother is in there. We tracked his horse. We mean you no harm. Just send out Jessie and we'll be on our way." Jessie. So the stranger had a name, and brothers. Maeve's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't send him out. He was barely conscious, burning with fever. Moving him could kill him. But what would they do if she refused? She took a deep, steadying breath and moved to the heavy plank door. "He's in no condition to be moved," she called out, her voice, tight but clear. "He's been shot." I pulled him from the river. There was another pause. She could hear the creak of saddle leather, the soft snort of a horse. Then the same voice spoke again, but closer this time. He had dismounted. "Ma'am, my name is Wyatt Colton. The man in your cabin is my brother, Jesse. The third is our brother, Finn. We ain't looking for a fight. We just want to see him." The name Colton landed like a stone in her gut. The Colton brothers. Their reputation preceded them across the territory. They weren't common outlaws who robbed stages. They were something else entirely, a tight-knit clan of gunslingers who dealt in their own harsh brand of justice and retribution. They were fiercely loyal to each other and utterly ruthless to their enemies. Having one Colton on her cot was bad enough. Having all three at her door was a death sentence. "He needs to rest," she insisted, stalling for time she didn't have. "Then we'll wait," Wyatt's voice replied, patient but laced with steel. But we would be more comfortable waiting inside by our brother's side. It wasn't a request. Maeve knew she had no choice. Refusing would be seen as a challenge, and the Coltons by all accounts never backed down from a challenge. Slowly, her hand trembling, she drew back the heavy bar securing the door. She opened it a crack and found herself staring at the man who had spoken. He was tall, older than the one on her cot, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. His face was weathered, but his bearing was that of a commander. He wore a long duster, and the handle of a Colt peacemaker was visible at his hip. Behind him stood another man, younger and stockier, with a restless, explosive energy. His hand hovered near his own gun, and his scowl was a permanent fixture. This had to be Finn. Wyatt's eyes flicked from Maeve to the cot, and a flicker of something relief maybe softened his hard features for a barest instant. He stepped inside without being invited, Finn following close behind his boots, thudding on the wooden floor. They filled the small cabin, their presence sucking the very air from the room. Wyatt went straight to the cot, his gaze assessing his brother's condition. He felt Jessie's forehead, then examined the bandages Maeve had applied. He looked at the clean wounds, the poultice, the relative peace of the patient. He turned back to Maeve, his expression unreadable. "You did this? You pulled him from the river and patched him up." Maeve simply nodded, her throat too dry for words. Wyatt exchanged a long, significant look with Finn. Finn's scowl deepened, but he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. It was as if a silent verdict had been reached. Wyatt turned his full attention back to Maeve. He moved with a deliberate slowness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. "Ma'am," he began, his voice dropping to that same low, authoritative tone. "We Coltons have a code. A man who saves one of us becomes our friend. A man who harms one of us becomes a ghost. But our code for women is older, more binding." He took a step closer. Maeve stood her ground, her hand clenching into a fist at her side. "There's an old saying our father taught us." Wyatt continued, his eyes locking onto hers. "The one who pulls a Colton back from the river's edge, back from the brink of the next world, They tie their fate to ours. You didn't just save his life, you claimed it. Maeve stared at him, uncomprehending. I don't understand. I don't want anything. I just want you to take him and leave me in peace. A humorless smile touched Wyatt's lips. That's the thing about fate, Mom. It doesn't much care what you want. You saved him. Our way that makes him yours. He'll need a wife to see him through this recovery to keep him grounded. He paused, letting the impossible words hang in the air. And it makes you ours. His brothers are riding at nightfall to claim her for him. Looks like we're right on time. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't gratitude. This was a cage snapping shut around her. This was a proclamation delivered as a sentence. The man on the cot wasn't just a patient anymore. He was her burden, her responsibility, and according to the chilling logic of the man in front of her, her future husband. The storm she had feared hadn't just followed him. It had walked right through her front door and announced it was here to stay. The hours that followed Wyatt Colton's pronouncement bled into a waking nightmare. Maeve felt as though she were moving through thick molasses, every action surreal, every word spoken around her, an echo in a language of madness. The Coltons had not asked for her opinion. They had stated a fact as they saw it. She was now part of their world, an asset to be managed apiece on their board. Finn, the volatile brother, immediately set about securing the cabin as if it were a military outpost. He checked the windows, the sturdiness of the door, and took inventory of Maeve's meager supplies with a critical, dismissive air. His every movement was a judgment on her life, her poverty, her solitude. He didn't speak to her directly, but she felt his contemptuous gaze on her like a physical weight. He was a tightly coiled spring of suspicion and aggression, and he made it clear he saw her not as a savior, but as a potential liability. Wyatt, on the other hand, was a study in cold, unnerving pragmatism. He took over the care of his brother with a practiced hand, changing the bandages himself to inspect her work. You have a steady hand, Ma'am, he commented, his tone neutral, as if discussing the quality of a piece of livestock. The yarrow was a good choice. Stopped the worst of the bleeding. He didn't thank her. Gratitude was beneath him. He was merely acknowledging a service, rendered a service, for which payment was now being arranged in the form of her entire life. Maeve found her voice a fragile, trembling thing. You can't be serious. This is my home. You have no right. Wyatt straightened up from the cot and turned to face her. His blue eyes as hard and unyielding as winter ice. Right out here, right, is what you can hold on to. It's what you can protect. We protect our own. By pulling Jesse from that river, you made yourself one of our own, whether you like it or not. That's kidnapping. She shot back a spark of her old fire, cutting through the fear. No, Mum, Wyatt corrected smoothly. That's family. You'll get used to it. He explained their twisted logic with the patience of a man explaining the weather. Jesse was vulnerable. When he recovered, he would need care, a wife, someone to anchor him. A known element was always better than an unknown one. She had proven herself capable and trustworthy by saving him. In their world, this was a logical, almost honorable transaction. He spoke of it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, a simple settling of accounts. Maeve felt trapped, a fly caught in a spider's web. The cabin, once her sanctuary, had become her prison. The two brothers were her wardens. Wyatt was the mind, calm and calculating. Finn was the muscle, a constant, simmering threat. He'd taken her shotgun from above the mantel, checked the load, and then set it down in a corner, well out of her reach. The message was clear. Any tool she might use for defiance now belonged to them. She tried to appeal to reason. What happens when he wakes up? Surely he won't agree to this madness. Finn, who had been listening from the shadows, let out a short, harsh laugh. Jesse knows the rules. He knows the family code. He'll do what Wyatt says. We all do. The days that followed were a torment of tension and forced proximity. Maeve cooked for them, using her own dwindling supplies, while Finn watched her every move as if she might poison the pot. She tended to Jesse, whose fever raged on. During his brief moments of lucidity, he would look at her with confused, pain-filled eyes, whispering thanks before slipping back into delirium. He had no idea of the bargain his brothers had struck over his unconscious body. Each time he thanked her, a fresh wave of guilt and fury washed over Maeve. She learned more about the Coltons through their clipped conversations. They were on the run from a rival faction, a gang led by the man Jesse had muttered about, Silas Kane. The shootout by the river had been an ambush. Jesse had been separated from them, his horse had bolted, and he'd fallen into the current. Wyatt and Finn had been searching for him for 2 days, following the trail with a relentless tenacity. Her cabin, with its isolation and defensible position, was now their temporary stronghold. They were waiting for Jesse to heal enough to ride, and for the heat from Silas Kane's men to die down. And Maeve was part of the plan. One evening, as she was stirring a thin rabbit stew over the fire, Finn spoke to her directly for the first time. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" he sneered, leaning against the doorframe. Maeve didn't look at him. "I don't think about you at all." He pushed off the frame and walked toward her, his footsteps heavy. "You do. I see it in your eyes. You look at us like we're dirt. But you're the one living out here, in a shack alone. What happened, husband? Run off? Or did he just have the good sense to die and leave you be?" The cruelty of the words struck her like a physical blow. Her hand tightened on the wooden spoon. Thomas hadn't just died. He had been murdered, shot in the back by men just like Finn, men who lived by the gun and solved their problems with violence. The memory, the raw, gaping wound of it, threatened to overwhelm her. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a grief so profound it looked like hatred. "You know nothing about me." "I know you're kind," he spat. "You think you're civilized. You think there are rules. Out here there's only one rule: you take what you need to survive. And right now, Wyatt needs you to keep Jesse breathing, and Jesse needs a wife. Simple as that." "I am not a piece of property," she said, her voice dangerously low. Before Finn could retort, Wyatt's voice cut in from the cot where he was checking on Jesse. "That's enough, Finn. She's doing what's required. Don't push her." Finn shot a glare at his brother, then back at Maeve, before stalking outside to take up a watch. The air in the cabin was thick with unspoken violence. Maeve realized then that her situation was even more precarious than she'd thought. She wasn't just a prisoner of their code. She was a spark in a tinderbox of family dynamics, a catalyst for conflicts she couldn't begin to understand. That night, unable to sleep, she watched the steady rise and fall of Jesse's chest. His fever seemed to have broken slightly, his breathing a little deeper. He was going to live. The thought brought her no comfort. His survival was the very thing that sealed her fate. She had pulled him from the water to save his life, and in doing so she had drowned her own. On the 5th day of the Coltons' occupation of her life, the fever finally broke. Maeve knew it the moment she woke. The air in the cabin felt different, lighter. She had slept fitfully in her rocking chair, a position that was becoming miserably familiar. Across the room, Jesse's breathing was no longer the ragged, shallow panting of a man on the edge, but a slow, rhythmic whisper. She rose and went to his side. His forehead was cool and damp to the touch, His eyes, though still shadowed with exhaustion, were clear, and they were watching her. "You," he rasped, his voice raw from disuse. "You're the one." "The river." Maeve nodded, offering him a small sip of water from a tin cup. "My name is Maeve Riley. You've been here for 5 days." He drank greedily, then sank back onto the cot, his gaze taking in the cabin, then landing on Wyatt, who was dozing in a chair near the door. "Wyatt, Finn." "They're here," Maeve said softly. "They found you." Relief washed over Jesse's face, followed by a wave of pain as he tried to shift his position. "Silas. He set us up." "Rest now," Maeve urged. "Your brothers can tell you everything." But it was too late. Wyatt was awake, his senses instantly sharp. He was at the cot in 2 strides, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips as he looked down at his conscious brother. "Jesse. About damn time you decided to rejoin the living," Wyatt, Jesse said, his voice gaining a little strength. "Good to see you." "What happened?" Silas Kane played dirty as usual, Finn said, stepping in from outside, drawn by the voices. "But we handled it. We've been holed up here, waiting for you to come around." Jesse looked from Wyatt to Finn, and then his eyes settled back on Maeve. There was a deep, sincere gratitude in his gaze. "Ma'am, Mrs. Riley, I owe you my life. There is nothing I can do to repay you, but I swear on my family's name, whatever you need, you'll have it." The air grew thick with a sudden suffocating tension. Maeve's heart began to pound. This was the moment of truth. Wyatt placed a hand on Jesse's shoulder, his expression hardening back into its usual unreadable mask. "She's already been repaid, Jesse. Or rather, the arrangement has been made." Jesse frowned, a line of confusion creasing his brow. "Arrangement? What are you talking about?" Wyatt looked directly at Maeve, his gaze a clear command for her to remain silent. He then turned back to his brother. "Jesse, she saved you. Pulled you from the river. By the old code, the one Dad taught us. She claimed you." Jesse stared at him, blinking slowly as he processed the words. "The code? You can't be serious, Wyatt. That's an old story." "It's the law of our family," Finn interjected, his arms crossed. "It's how we keep our bonds strong. You know that. It's a superstition we tell over a campfire." Jesse shot back, his voice rising with disbelief and agitation. He tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "We don't just claim a woman because of it. Not one who saved my life out of the goodness of her own heart." He looked at Maeve, his eyes wide with apology and horror. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. My brothers, they can be overzealous." "It's not zeal, it's our way," Wyatt said, his voice dropping into the low, dangerous tone that meant the subject was closed. "You're weak. You'll need looking after. She's proven she can do it. She will be your wife. It's settled." Settled, Jesse's voice was incredulous. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his face pale with a combination of weakness and fury. "You settled my life for me while I was half dead. Did you even ask her? Did it occur to either of you to ask the woman who saved me what she wanted?" He looked at Maeve, really looked at her. And for the first time, he seemed to see beyond the capable nurse. He saw the fear she'd been hiding, the exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders, the defiance in her jaw. He saw a prisoner in her own home. "Did they threaten you?" he asked her directly, his voice soft. Maeve hesitated, caught between the fiery anger of the recovering Jesse and the cold, immovable will of Wyatt. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She wasn't a fool. Openly defying Wyatt now would only bring more trouble. But Jesse saw it. He saw the truth in her eyes. He turned his glare back to Wyatt. You had no right. This is not about honor, Wyatt. This is about control. It's always been about control with you. I am the head of this family. Wyatt stated his voice, like flint. I do what is necessary to protect it. And you, little brother, are a part of this family that needs protecting. You'll thank me later. Like hell I will, Jesse muttered, falling back against the cot, his energy spent. He closed his eyes, but the anger radiated from him. A deep schism had just cracked open in the foundation of the Colton family. The brothers who had arrived as a united, unstoppable force were now at odds. Finn looked from Wyatt to Jesse, his loyalty clearly with Wyatt, but a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Wyatt's authority for the first time had been openly challenged. Maeve stood in the corner, a silent observer to the storm she had unleashed. She had hoped Jesse's awakening would be her salvation, that he would be a voice of reason. Instead, he had become another volatile element in the cabin's suffocating atmosphere. He was her defender, yes, but his defiance had only served to entrench Wyatt's position. The cage door hadn't opened. The bars had just gotten stronger, and now the beasts inside were starting to fight each other. The conflict between the brothers festered in the small cabin, a poison that tainted every meal, every word, every shared silence. Jesse, though still weak, was resolute in his opposition. He refused to be a party to Wyatt's archaic code, and he made his disapproval clear through stony silence and sharp, cutting remarks. Wyatt, in turn, treated Jesse like a petulant child, ignoring his protests, and continuing to operate as if the matter was decided. Finn, ever the loyal soldier, sided with Wyatt, his hostility toward Maeve deepening, as if blaming her for the rift between his brothers. Maeve was caught in the crossfire. She continued to care for Jesse, changing his bandages and preparing broth for him, but their interactions were now charged with a new, awkward tension. He would thank her profusely, apologizing for his brother's behavior with a sincerity that was both comforting and heartbreaking. He was trying to be her ally, but his powerlessness was as palpable as her own. "I'll talk to him again when I'm stronger," Jesse promised her one afternoon as she checked the stitches on his wound. "Wyatt can be stubborn as a mule, but he's not a monster. He sees the world in terms of threats and assets. And which one am I?" Maeve asked, her voice devoid of emotion. Jesse met her gaze, his own filled with regret. "He thinks you're an asset, but he's treating you like a threat." "I'm sorry, Maeve. It was the first time he'd used her given name." It felt strangely intimate in the cold, tense atmosphere. The fragile, hostile stalemate was shattered 2 days later. Finn had been out on a scouting ride, checking their perimeter. He returned at a gallop, his horse lathered in sweat, and burst into the cabin without ceremony. "Riders," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "5 of them, headed this way. It's Kane's men." I recognized the Pinto Silas favors. Instantly the family squabble was forgotten. A switch was flipped within the Coltons, and they became a single, focused unit. Wyatt was on his feet, his hand on his gun belt. How far out? An hour, maybe less. They weren't moving fast, spreading out like they're tracking, not chasing. "They found where Jesse's horse ran to," Wyatt surmised. "They know we're holed up somewhere in this valley." He turned his eyes, sweeping the cabin, no longer seeing it as a home, but as a fortification. His gaze fell on Maeve. "We'll make our stand here," he declared. "It's solid, good sightlines to the ridge. Finn, take the front window. Jesse, can you shoot?" Jesse pushed himself into a sitting position, his face grim. "Give me a rifle. I can shoot lying down." Wyatt nodded, then his gaze fixed on Maeve again. "You, get away from the windows. Stay by the hearth. And stay quiet." A cold fury born of days of helplessness rose in Maeve. They were turning her home into a battlefield, ordering her around as if she were a piece of furniture. She thought of Thomas, of the life violence had stolen from her. She would not cower by the fireplace while a war erupted around her. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. All three brothers turned to look at her. "What did you say?" Finn growled. "I said no." Maeve repeated, her chin lifting. "This is my home. You brought this trouble here. I will not hide in a corner while you defend it. Give me a gun." Finn laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You hear that, Wyatt? The little lady wants a gun." But Wyatt wasn't laughing. He was studying her, a flicker of something new in his expression. "Can you use one?" Maeve walked to the corner where Finn had left her shotgun. She picked it up, the smooth, worn wood familiar in her hands. She checked the breech, her movements fluid and sure. "My husband taught me. I can hit a running jackrabbit at 50 yards. She looked directly at Wyatt, her eyes challenging him. "I'm a better shot than your brother is right now, laid up on that cot." Jesse from his bed managed a weak smile. "She's got you there, Wyatt." For a long moment, Wyatt stared at her. He saw the grim determination in her eyes, the steady set of her hands. This was not the frightened woman he had dismissed. This was someone else, entirely. He was a man who understood survival, and he recognized the look of a survivor. He gave a sharp, decisive nod. "All right. You take the side window. It's got the narrowest angle. Don't fire unless they have passed the riverbank. We don't want them to know how many of us there are until they're committed." Finn looked at his brother in disbelief. "You're giving her a gun. She could shoot us in the back." "She won't," Wyatt said, with a certainty that surprised even Maeve. "Kane's men won't leave any witnesses. Right now, her life depends on us, as much as ours depends on this cabin." It was a cold, pragmatic assessment, but it was true. The shared threat had forged the most unlikely of alliances. Maeve moved to the small side window, her shotgun resting on the sill. She was no longer just a prisoner or a prize. She was a combatant. The four of them waited in silence, a strange tableau of enemies united against a common foe. The Colton brothers, a clan of hardened gunslingers, and the widow who wanted nothing to do with their world, standing shoulder to shoulder against the coming storm. Maeve could feel Finn's suspicious eyes on her, Jesse's worried gaze, and Wyatt's calculating assessment. She felt no camaraderie, only a grim resolve. She wasn't fighting for the Coltons. She was fighting for her home. She was fighting for the quiet life they had shattered. And as she watched the horizon, waiting for the first sign of Silas Kane's men, she knew that no matter how this ended, nothing would ever be the same. The silence stretched thin and taut until it was frayed by the distant crunch of gravel. Maeve's knuckles were white where she gripped the shotgun. Through her small window, she saw them first 5 riders emerging from the cottonwoods downriver, moving slowly, their rifles held ready across their saddles. A big man on a pinto horse was at their lead, Silas Kane. "They're here," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the cabin like a gunshot. "Hold your fire," Wyatt commanded, his voice a low growl from the front window. "Let them get closer. Let them get confident." The riders fanned out their approach, cautious. They clearly saw the cabin as a potential trap. They stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond effective pistol range. Maeve could see them talking, gesturing toward the small curl of smoke still rising from her chimney. "They know someone's home," Finn muttered. Then Kane raised his hand. 2 of his men dismounted, using their horses for cover as they began to creep forward on foot, moving from boulder to boulder. The other 3, including Kane, remained mounted, a clear tactic to divide their attention. "They're testing us," Wyatt said. "Finn, take the one on the left. I'll take the one on the right." Jesse watched the mounted men. Maeve don't fire unless they rush the cabin. "Wait for my signal." The air grew heavy with anticipation. Maeve watched the two men creeping closer, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They were 50 yards away, then 40. One of them darted from behind a rock, making a run for the blind spot near the cabin's corner. Now Wyatt's voice cracked like a whip. 2 rifles exploded in unison. The sound was deafening inside the small space. Maeve saw the man who had been running pitch forward into the dirt. The other screamed and clutched his leg, scrambling back behind his rock. Instantly, the quiet valley erupted into chaos. The 3 mounted men opened fire bullets, thudding into the log walls of the cabin. Splinters flew, and a tin cup on Maeve's shelf was sent spinning. From the cot, Jesse's rifle answered the shot high and wide, but enough to make the riders scatter for better cover. "They're trying to flank us," Jesse yelled, his voice strained. 2 of them are moving toward the river. That was Maeve's side. She saw them, 2 dark shapes darting between the willows along the riverbank, trying to get to the back of the cabin, where there were no windows. They were close, too close. She didn't wait for Wyatt's order. She pushed the barrel of her shotgun through the window, took a steadying breath just as Thomas had taught her, and aimed not at the men, but just in front of them. She pulled the trigger. The shotgun's roar was a deep-throated boom, and its kick slammed hard against her shoulder. The buckshot ripped through the brush-shredding leaves and kicking up dirt. The 2 men dove for cover, surprised by the attack from a direction they had assumed was undefended. "Good shot," Wyatt yelled, not with anger at her disobedience, but with genuine approval. "Reload." The fight settled into a deadly rhythm. The crack of rifles, the thud of lead hitting wood, the shouts of the men outside. Maeve reloaded her hands, moving with a fumbling grace, her mind strangely calm. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her belly, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective rage. An hour crawled by. The afternoon sun beat down, turning the cabin into a sweltering oven, thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. One of Kane's men lay dead. Another was wounded. But 3 were still out there, peppering the cabin with relentless fire. Then came a new sound, a scraping, scrabbling noise from the roof. "They're on the roof!" Finn shouted, his eyes wide with alarm. "They're going to try and come down the chimney." Wyatt's face was grim. "There's no fire, just coals. They could do it." He looked around, his mind racing. "Finn, keep their heads down out front." Jesse watched the back. "Maeve." He hesitated, looking at the heavy oak table in the center of the room. "Help me." Together they heaved the table, upending it to form a barricade in front of the hearth. Just as they got it in place, a bundle of oil-soaked rags dropped down the chimney landing on the warm coals with a soft whoosh. Oily black smoke began to fill the cabin. "Get down, stay low," Wyatt ordered, coughing. Through the smoke, Maeve saw a pair of boots descend into the fireplace. Before the man could find his footing, Wyatt was there. He didn't use his gun. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the hearth and swung it with brutal force. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and the man from the roof crumpled onto the hearth, silent and still. But the distraction had cost them. A volley of shots smashed through the front window, and Finn cried out, clutching his arm, his rifle clattering to the floor. Finn, Wyatt yelled, turning from the fireplace. Maeve didn't hesitate. She scrambled over to Finn, tearing a strip from her apron. The bullet had gone clean through the fleshy part of his upper arm, but it was bleeding badly. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice sharp. Finn, his face pale and contorted in pain, looked at her with shocked eyes, but did as he was told. As she tied a makeshift pressure bandage around his arm, she was keenly aware of the shift in the room. Jesse was trying to cover 2 sides from his cot. Wyatt was pinned down at the front window. They were losing. Suddenly Jessie cried out. They're making a rush, all three of them. Maeve looked up from Finn's arm. Silas Kane and his remaining 2 men were charging the cabin, firing, as they ran, believing the defenders were smoked out and wounded. It was a desperate final gamble. Wyatt fired his shot, taking one of the men down. Jessie's rifle cracked, but his aim was off. Kane and the last man were almost at the door. Maeve let go of Finn. She grabbed her shotgun, stood up, and took a deep breath. She didn't go to the window. She walked straight to the door, the only part of the cabin not currently under fire. She took aim at the spot where she knew they would appear. The heavy plank door splintered and burst inward under a heavy boot. For a split second, Silas Kane filled the doorway, his face a mask of triumphant fury, his pistol raising. Maeve fired. The blast was catastrophic at that range. Kane was thrown backward out of the doorway and into the harsh sunlight, his charge ending in a brutal final instant. The last man, stunned, froze in his tracks, his eyes wide with disbelief. It was all the time Wyatt needed. His pistol barked once, and the siege was over. Silence descended, broken only by the crackling of the smouldering rags and Finn's pained groans. The cabin was a wreck, splintered, smoky, and smelling of blood. But they were alive. Maeve stood over the smoking barrel of her shotgun, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the savage, violent adrenaline of it all. Wyatt slowly lowered his pistol, staring at her. The calculating commander, the ruthless pragmatist, was gone. In his eyes she saw something she had never expected to see from a Colton. Respect. The silence that followed the final gunshot was heavier than the battle that had preceded it. It was a silence filled with the scent of gunpowder smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Outside, the world was still the only movement, the slow drift of dust motes in the slanted afternoon light. Inside the wrecked cabin, 4 people breathed in the aftermath, their lives irrevocably tangled by the violence they had just survived. Maeve's hands trembled the heavy shotgun, suddenly feeling like an impossible weight. She lowered it, the butt thudding softly on the wooden floor. Her gaze fell on the body of Silas Kane, sprawled just outside her doorway, a testament to the brutal line she had crossed. She had taken a life. The thought didn't bring satisfaction or horror, only a profound, hollow emptiness. She had done what was necessary to survive, to protect the home she had bled for, but the act had carved something out of her soul. Wyatt was the first to move. He holstered his pistol, his eyes still fixed on Maeve. The look he gave her was stripped of all its former arrogance and command. He saw her not as a pawn or a possession, but as an equal, a fellow survivor forged in the same fire. He walked over to Finn, who was slumped against the wall, his face ashen. "Let me see that," Wyatt said, his voice rough. He inspected Maeve's handiwork on the bandage. "It'll hold, but it needs to be cleaned properly." He looked at Maeve. "Can you do it?" It wasn't an order. It was a request, a quiet acknowledgement of her skill and her place in this new, brutal reality. Maeve nodded, her throat tight. She moved to the hearth, her feet crunching on shattered glass and debris, and retrieved her medical supplies. As she knelt beside Finn to properly clean and bind his wound, the younger Colton brother refused to meet her eyes. But he didn't pull away. He sat statue still, accepting her care. The animosity that had radiated from him for days was gone, replaced by a sullen, grudging dependence. She had saved his life, just as she had saved Jessie's, and the debt was a weight he didn't know how to carry. From the cot, Jessie watched the entire scene, his face a mixture of pride and profound sorrow. "Maeve," he said, his voice filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You were incredible." The praise felt alien. Incredible was not a word she would use for the cold efficiency she had discovered within herself. She finished bandaging Finn's arm, her movements deft and sure. Once the immediate medical needs were met, a new unspoken tension settled over them. The external threat was gone, the bodies of Silas Kane and his men lying as grim monuments in the yard. But the original conflict, the reason for this siege, remained. What happened now? The Colton Code that Wyatt had invoked seemed like a foolish, childish thing in the face of real death. Wyatt seemed to understand this. After dragging the bodies a respectful distance from the cabin, he came back inside, his face grim. He didn't look at Jessie. He looked at Maeve. "We owe you," he said, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "More than we can say. We brought this war to your doorstep, and you finished it." "I fought for my home," Maeve stated simply, her gaze unwavering. "It's more than that," Wyatt conceded. He finally turned to face his brother on the cot. "Jessie was right. I was wrong." The admission was stark, stripped of any excuse. It was the confession of a man whose rigid worldview had been shattered. This isn't about some old code told around a campfire. It's not about a claim. That's not a way to build a family. It's a way to build a prison. He looked back at Maeve, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of the man he might have been before the world had hardened him into a leader of gunslingers. "You are free to go. We'll give you whatever you need money, a horse protection, to the nearest town. You saved my brother's life, and you saved ours. You don't owe us anything. We are in your debt." The offer of freedom was a cool drink of water after days in the desert. It was everything she had wanted, the only thing she had prayed for. But as she looked around the ruined cabin, her home, which now felt like a stranger's, a strange new feeling took root. It wasn't a sense of belonging, not yet. It was a sense of entanglement. She looked at Jessie, who was watching her with an expression of hope so raw and vulnerable it made her ache. She looked at Finn, who was now staring at his boots, a silent portrait of shame and confusion. She looked at Wyatt, a man humbled by the very woman he had sought to command. Their lives were a violent, chaotic storm, but for a brief moment, she had been the calm eye within it. And she had changed them. The question was, had they changed her too? It was Jessie who finally broke the silence, his voice weak but clear. "Wyatt is right, Maeve. You're free. You don't owe us anything. But I have to ask you to stay." Maeve turned her gaze to him. "Not because of any code," he said quickly, pushing himself into a sitting position despite the pain. "Not as a payment for a debt, but as a choice. My brothers and I, we've only ever known this life. Fighting, running, looking over our shoulders. You, in the few days I've been awake, I've seen a different way. A strength that isn't in a gun. A home that isn't just a place to hide." He took a shaky breath. "I don't know what the future holds for us. We have enemies. This life is hard. But I don't want to face it the old way. I don't want to be the man who was shot and dragged from a river. I want to be the man who was saved by Maeve Riley. If you would have me, I want to learn how to build, not just how to fight. I'm not claiming you, Maeve. I'm asking you. Will you stay? Will you give us? Give me a chance to be worthy of the life you saved." His proposal hung in the air, more fragile and more powerful than Wyatt's decree had ever been. This wasn't a sentence. It was a plea, a choice. She could take the horse and ride away back to the solitude she had once craved, though she knew it would never feel the same. Or she could stay. She could stay and face the uncertain, violent future with these broken, dangerous men who had, against all odds, shown her a glimpse of the fierce, unyielding loyalty that bound them together. She looked at her shattered home, then at the man on the cot, and realized the river hadn't just brought her a wounded gunslinger. It had brought her a crossroad. In the end, it wasn't about a code, a claim, or a debt paid in violence. It was about a choice made in the quiet aftermath of a storm. Maeve Riley, a woman who had sought solitude to escape the ghosts of her past, found her future standing in the ruins of her home. The Colton brothers arrived as a force of nature intending to claim her, but it was she who ended up changing them. Her quiet strength fractured their brutal certainty, and her courage bought them all a second chance. The path forward would be uncertain, fraught with the dangers of the Coltons' world, but it would be a path they walked together, not as captors and a captive, but as a new, fiercely protective and unlikely family, forged in gunfire and bound by a debt of the heart. What do you think Maeve's life will be like with the Coltons? Do you believe a love born from such violence can truly last? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of survival and choice, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more tales from the heart of the Wild West.